I'm John Scott. I'm the Purdue Extension Coordinator with digital agriculture. Today we're going to talk about scouting with the drone, kind of the big overview of how would you scout with the drone. I do have here a few additional resources I want to point out first. A couple different videos that we've put up. The important one here is the scouting fields with a UAV video. It really breaks down exactly how you could go in and scout a field. It's basically how I do it, as shown on the iPad, is what the recording is. So I talk about doing a programmed or a planned flight, and also doing a manual flight. That particular video, I'm using the Phantom 4 Pro, but it's pretty applicable to most everything else. And then the other video is just practical applications for UAVs. I know that the purpose of today's talk is scouting with a drone, but there's a ton of other applications out there, so it's a good primer for that. All right, so the steps before scouting. First and foremost, you need to plan to become certified. So you're going to need to know the FAA requirements for flying UAVs commercially, and you need to pass the Part 107 remote pilot test to become commercially certified. One question I get a lot is, if I'm not getting paid for this, do I need to be certified? And the answer is yes. If you're going out and creating value for anything, that is a commercial operation in the eyes of the FAA. So if you're a producer, say, and you're just going out and scouting your own fields, but you make a decision off of that creates value, and then you're a commercial operation. So pretty much everything we do in ag will need to be a certified operation. You also need to plan for your equipment. So what kind of equipment do you need? What are your operational needs? Then you select the drone, the sensors, and the software to fill those operational needs. So it's really important that you think through that ahead of time. And maybe you already have a drone, and that's what you've got to work with. Well, think through what you need as far as that's concerned. And then plan for failure as well, right? So you need to get insurance, use that insurance. You're going to have issues eventually if you fly enough. You will eventually have a crash. And you need to have at least a liability insurance. So as far as drone selection, I want to focus in on that a little bit more. What are you going to be flying? Are you going to be flying a fixed wing or a multi-rotor? That's one of the first questions to ask. Most folks in ag are going to use a multi-rotor because it's going to be more versatile overall. You can take video with it, you can do pictures with it, you can map with it, you can do about anything under the sun that you can think of. So that's where we're going to focus most of this. But there are some good fixed wing options out there for mapping. The big ones would be like your Ag Eagle or your EB, things like that. The other question is, what are the drone's capabilities for what you want to do? Can it interface with mapping programs or not? Not all of them have that ability, depending on if the SDK or the software development kit's available. Does it have thermal? Do you have a thermal camera on it, or a multispectral camera, or hyperspectral, or LiDAR? Do you need those things to do your job and what you're wanting to do? Does the drone have obstacle avoidance capabilities? So can it see and avoid things, or in some cases see and maneuver around them or brake? Can the camera that you purchase zoom? And if it can zoom, how much can it zoom? What's the resolution of that? And then what are the image and video formats available? So thinking through all these things as you think, how do I want to apply this, really can help you determine what drone you need. An example of this would be, I have a couple drones, some that have zoom and some that don't. I have some that have thermal, some with multi-spec. For just general scouting, I'm a big proponent of a drone that has a camera that can zoom in really tight, so you can actually see fine details that you might not see otherwise. But I also want one that I can map with. You don't always have to map with them, but it's nice to have that option if the need arises. And at the end of the day, what drone will balance equipment costs with the desired final product? That's going to be your guiding light for your drone selection. So now, how to scout with a drone? How do we actually do this? There's two main ways we can do this. There's there's programmed planned flights and manual flights are the two big ways. So your program flights, you're going to you could generate an RGB orthomosaic, different plant health maps depending on your cameras and the algorithms you can run. You can do stand counts with these that are getting more and more accurate. And we can also generate elevation maps, which can be handy in certain situations. As far as manual flights, basically your standard video and standard images are there, and then any zoomed in images that you might be able to get that you just can't quite get with a non-zoom camera, or that you might not be able to see also on the ground if you're using a traditional style of scouting. Here we've got a video I'm going to play. And what we're going to look at on this video is how you actually would do a planned program flight on the back end. So what are you setting up? So the first thing we would set up is the field boundary. Put that in. If you look on the left side here, you can see our minutes, acres, images, and the battery. We can give the plan a name. It's always good to make sure you name it, whatever the field is. I also like to record the time that I do it, just so that you can remember that stuff. You can go into advanced features, and you can change your front lap and your side lap as well. So by doing that, actually, when you change your front or your side lap, rather, if you look at the green lines, that's the path that the drone's traveling. It will get more green lines because that side lap's getting tighter. So the flight will take longer and more battery life, but you also collect more images and have a better resolution of the map, a lot more crisp, clean map at the end of the day. Once you've done all this and you've set up whatever you want to set up, your exposure if you want to, focus, once you're happy with it, you got your altitude set in, you're ready to hook it up to the drone and fly. From here, basically, you're a couple button clicks from being airborne. And the good thing is these drones are then autonomous. So you don't actually control the sticks at all. It goes ahead, it hits altitude, and it goes and flies the job. Maps the whole thing. When it gets done at the end, it comes back and lands. And all that data is collected and sitting on the SD card on the drone, ready to be uploaded. Now, whether you use this program, this is Drone Deploy, or any other program, they all pretty well work the same. They have the same basic steps that we're showing here of how you would set it up, how you would set up the job, and then how would you execute the job. Now, as far as the algorithms on the back end with these different providers, there is some variation, but 9 times out of 10, this is how you're going to set up and do a planned or program flight. And here's what you can generate with that. So here's 4 maps. We've got an RGB map in the upper left corner, followed by a vary. And the bottom part, we have the NDVI and the NDRE. So these are all 4 maps generated from the same drone in the same flight. The RGB and the vary come from just your standard digital camera. And there's no extra cost as far as hardware, but to make these maps, you have to run it through an algorithm and a stitching software. Now, NDVI and NDRE, those are going to cost a little bit more. These 2 maps were generated with the Centera Double 4K, which used to cost about $3,200. I'm not sure what the exact price on it is now, but they're going to generate that. So your NDVI is your normalized difference vegetative index, and your NDRE is your normalized difference vegetative index red edge. And it says here on the bottom, why does this matter? A lot of times we talk with producers in industry, they ask about NDVI. How do we use these plant health images? So what we did here was just put them side by side and say, okay, what do we really need? What are the values of the potential advantages and disadvantages? If you want an NDVI map, an NDRE, if that's important for the business and the cause, and you need the additional hardware, you need the additional cameras to do that. If that's not really a driving factor, then you can usually get by with just your RGB and your vary made with the standard digital camera. But either way, you can generate some sharp looking maps to really start teasing through some different details. If you look at all these maps, you can see, it's a split field. The left side looks a little bit rougher than the right side, as you can tell just by the patterns across the field. The right side had swine manure applied. The left side did not. And we can see tease those differences out. We've got stand counts, and this has really come on the scene and then really exploded in the last couple of years. This is an example using, just your basic stand count features. We did 2 of them. We did one at a half-acre resolution and one at a 2-acre resolution and put them both on the same map. So the half-acre resolution was the top row and the bottom row, and the 2-acre resolution was the middle row. in this image. In general, our UAV generated count was 31,000 to, and our 2 acre was 32,000. The traditional count was 31,200 over 3 separate counts. We went at an angle across that field to do those separate counts just so we could get out of the same planter pass to do a true scouting count. This was also corn. They do a pretty good job on the corn side, these automated counts. It's a little bit rougher on the soybeans. I haven't yet found where they're really super accurate on soybeans, but they do a pretty sharp job on corn at the right growth stages. So the growth stage is going to have to be that V2, V3 growth stage. You get V4, V5, and the leaf margins start touching, and it's going to get a lot worse. These black dots you see here, that's also where it didn't generate a count because we had different rows, different row orientation, and it just couldn't, the algorithm couldn't quite tease that out. Elevation maps. So your elevation map on all these drones that you're going to get for the most part is going to be a digital surface model or a DSM, which is different from a digital terrain model or a DTM. So it'll actually show you the surface. So if you have a standing crop out there, you'll see the surface of that crop. So if you have areas that are not performing as well, you'll tease that out, but you won't get a true ground surface unless you wait until when the crop's off, like this image here. I showed the orthomosaic in here as well, just so you could actually see the ground, and we can elevate that back to the elevation. So in our elevation map, our red is high and our blue is low, and you can really see across that whole field how the topography changes, which tends to be how our water moves throughout that field as well. In flatter areas, it's maybe not quite as valuable. In areas with bigger terrain differences or bigger topography differences, it's a little bit more useful. But this also is useful for talking through subsurface drainage and things like that. Manual flights, here's another video. So we're leaving the program flights, looking at just manual flights now. What I like to do when I'm first going to a field is take it up in the middle, get up, 350, 400 feet, and do a quick 360 of the field. Just sit in the middle and go in a big circle just to look at what's going on. This field's 50 acres, and the video is about 24 seconds long. And that 24 seconds, if you look, you can see some areas that are a bit lighter colored. You can see some areas where it looks like the beans are starting to lodge over. You can see, if you look kind of in the middle of this part of the image, you can see where there's some pixels that are slightly different color, which tells you there's maybe a weed issue there, things like that. And in fact, where those pixels are, I flew down a little bit lower and got a close up of that vegetation. So you can see that we do have some weed escapes, and we can identify those weeds from this image. Now with the newer technology, with the zooms, we could zoom right into it and say, yes, definitively, that's probably what this is. In this case, it was water hemp. With these manual pictures, every time you take a picture, it records a lat long. So you have a GPS coordinate, which is what we're showing here. You can take that point data and then put it into a GIS system, and you can walk right up to where that issue was in the field. So this image shows where that weed escape was in the last picture, exactly where it was in the field. So we could go and cut that out if we wanted to, or spot spray it or something like that. And this again is just manual flights. So this isn't additional cost for software and things like that. This is just using the drone and the stock software that comes with it to go out and scout a field. So a few select examples as we start wrapping up here. Just some common practices. We've got this field of was a small cornfield and a couple of beans. The lighter colored soybeans are in an area with the yellow, oranges, brown. Here on the right-hand side, circled in red. So this was seen in a live map while flying a mission. It was mid-August. So mid-August with yellowing soybeans like this is kind of concerning, especially this year we had a wet spring. The other things I real quick want to point out in the map is the lighter colored patches just to the left and to the right of the yellow patch. Those are all weeds. In this case, it's giant ragweed. One of the issues, if you'll notice on the top, is there's a road, and those giant ragweeds are actually higher, or it's not a road, it's a lane. And those ragweeds were high enough that you couldn't see the area of concern that we have circled from that lane. So unless you were physically walking out in there, just driving by, you wouldn't have thought anything of it. But we were able to tease it out here. So then in the next slide, we flew down a little bit lower and took a look at these beans a little closer with the Phantom, just to try to say, okay, what's really going on here? What are we seeing? Started thinking, okay, this is probably SDS given some of the patterns, but it was still tough to tell in these images. So I actually went out into the field and took a look, and still need to go out in the field, check things out. These drones are just good tools to help you understand where to go. So saw this, split the stems, and white pith, everything looked good. It was not brown stem rot, so we had sudden death syndrome was kind of what we had decided. Dug a few roots, and sure enough, also found some soybean cyst nematode in that same area. So using the drone as a diagnostic tool, we were able to really zero in on where this problem area was at in the field, and then we could drill down from there to start understanding more of what was going on. The other thing, as we're the drones have been changing. The Phantom 4 Pro version 2, that came out in 2018, if I remember right. So that was five years ago now. And the technology is not obsolete by any means, but it's getting outdated. It's being replaced by newer technology. So we did some side-by-sides, also looking at the DJI Mavic 3 and also the Skydio 2 Plus. So we've got these three images taken the same day, minutes apart, 3 different flights, same field. And if you look here, for the most part, the overview, pretty similar across all three. But we did fly down into this area in the lower left corner of the images where the crop was not there, quite frankly, where those holes were at, just to take a closer look. And here's what we saw when we take a look at that. With the Phantom 4 Pro, you cannot zoom in. If you want to zoom in, you actually physically have to fly closer. So that's about as close as I was comfortable flying that without running the risk of getting it down into the corn canopy and having transmission issues. The Skydio 2 Plus and the Mavic 3 were flown actually the same altitude as the Phantom 4 Pro. I just zoomed in with those cameras. They both have zoom capabilities. If we look at the Mavic 3 here in the center, if you look at the far right side in the center of that image, you'll see the soil looks a little bit different. That's actually a hoof print. So we were able to determine from that image that this is in fact deer damage, given the track from the deer and the type of damage that we're seeing overall. The Skydio 2 Plus, we were able to zoom in closer than what we could with the Phantom 4, but not near to the level of detail we could get with the Mavic 3 in this case. So just look at these three side by side, doing some side by side comparisons of what can we do with the technology today. As far as other still shots and things like that, this was a neat picture that we saw later in the season with corn lodging. So we've got corn lodging by hybrid due to water damage. So if you look in the kind of the center of the picture, you'll see where it's kind of got that white area. That's where the sun is actually reflecting on the water. We had a collapsed tile in this field. It flooded. And one of the hybrids obviously wasn't very happy with that. So we were able to tease that out and say, okay, whatever hybrid that is, and I don't know idea what it was, but we can say, hey, this one hybrid doesn't like wet feet, apparently. I do want to point out, though, that if you look on the lower right, you'll see the road. And if you look at the hybrid they use on the end rows, you don't have near the issue that we're seeing inside the field itself. So anybody that drove by, the farmer as he was driving by, and if he looked at that field, he wouldn't be able to see where the issue is in the middle of the field. But with the drone, it pops. Even if we had scouted this field with the randomness kind of some of the patterns here, it might have been difficult to really associate, hey, what is going on? Yeah, we have issues in areas, but what is the pattern? And understanding and equating that pattern to what we can see here would have been very difficult. So some concluding thoughts as we wrap it up. Mapping is not necessary to scout with a drone. You don't have to use a mapping program, in order to scout with the drone. In fact, you can do a lot of good for a lot of producers without a mapping software. Just taking the drone up, looking around, flying down low. If you're going to do this, I do recommend highly having something with some zoom capabilities so you can get in tight and see what's going on. Mapping does add more context to an overall report that you're not going to get without it, quite frankly. You don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get a very capable scouting drone. You just don't. You can certainly, but you don't have to. And this is my opinion, but some of the best crop scouting drones range from $500 to $4,000. Most of the ones that I use are in that range, and I can do some really great things for producers in this area. Drones can increase scouting efficiency and provide a perspective that is impossible to get by only walking the field. That's just a fact. I mean, the only other thing you could do is get in an airplane and fly and look, or you can climb up on the grain bins and look in some cases, and you'll only be able to see as far as you can see with the grain bins. Now, the good thing with drones is it's an instant grain bin anywhere in the country, which is really handy. And then drones have many field uses outside of just regular crop scouting season. So you can look at residue management, cover crop evaluation, subsurface drainage evaluation, which we talked about earlier, general water movement, outside of the growing season, weed detection. So your fall weeds that come in, your early spring weeds, understanding how that's working and looking at that, and so much more. It's more than just all I can do is use it from May to September and get an NDVI map. That's a good part of it. That's important, but there's a lot more utility we can have as we start evaluating our fields and really taking it from a systemic approach. With that, I'd like to say thank you. That's my contact information. And the UAV website is available as well, with all kinds of great features and concepts of what we've done with drones throughout extension here in Indiana.